we can have a system where the doctors type out all the prescriptions, maybe into a computer, although you have the problem of computer viruses. And there was one that I read about that if you open up searches for Jimmy Fallon, what you get is sometimes...
Doctors can try out prescriptions. So again, this coaching, because some students will just take, they just can run with one association to the next, okay?
Because, I mean, a virus could get into a medical computer to change all the...
I'm going to stop you for a second. Let's bring it back to Romeo and Juliet.
Well, it's about responsibility. People with power need to be careful. What you do impacts other people. So the pharmacist there, the apothecary, he has that power and the importance. And if the doctors don't realize they have power, then what you end up with is chaos. And the doctors, you need to stop me, Ron, because I've run out of material.
Can you think about how this might apply into your life in some way in school?
Well,
I just wanted to see where you're going.
If I'd had 2 hours more sleep, I could have kept going another 5 minutes. Well, who has power at the school? The principal. The principal could talk to us more. She could set aside an hour where students who wanted to ask her questions about what was going on in the school could ask her questions. And that way you have power and you make the person with power accountable and accessible. And that way, well, I mean, with Romeo and Juliet, the apothecary, you know, if he'd been forced to really think about what he was doing, maybe...
Okay, that's good. So hopefully what we're trying to illustrate with our really cheesy little role play there is it's kind of about this coaching in the moment, right?
Failed
and we
actors.
can teach our students to have these kind of conversations with each other, establishing these ground rules where we take time to explore and draw out and then kind of provide the boundaries again, bring people back, right? And other times when it's time to push them further. So as we say, some students are going to parrot back the material, and we want them to get to more original ideas.
That was my parrot, by the way. That was all.
His actual parrot, yes.
Now, getting back to the subject.
Right.
Other students will say these things that are so random that maybe not as extreme as Callie, but that you may wonder, you know, are they actually thinking about the class material? Can they make something that's a coherent contribution that we can build on?
Very disturbing image.
It's a very disturbing image.
Illustrates the point. So here's our little thing. So gently nudge the appropriate student to be a little bit more original and personally meaningful, and then gently steer the novel student to connect to the content. So if we think about the common core, which is, you know, we talk about like breaking the camel's back, adding yet another responsibility to your plates, right? How does this all fit in with even higher levels of constraint?
So the Common Core, in essence, wants to see evidence of content knowledge and student thinking. And the best way to teach content is to have the students learn it by getting them thinking about it. And just getting students to think about the content knowledge is step one. Just having that happen. And that happens when they're engaged. And there are many ways to engage students. I want to emphasize we're not saying the only way to engage students is by increasing creativity. There are many, many, many ways. But creativity is one way. Creativity can be seen as a vehicle to engage students to think, a vehicle to teach them the content knowledge. A student who's feeling creative and engaged is more likely to think about the class material.
Yeah, and I think the Common Core, you know, Dr. Adet kind of illustrated this idea that it can be a great success or a great failure, depending on are we willing to make an adjustment to our practices to get kids and ourselves to think a little bit deeper about the content. And one way that we can do it that I think you probably already do in your practice is to have them think in original ways. We're going to give some concrete examples of that in a second.
Like right now. So one of the things that I've always tried to do is to allow us to have many different types of assignments. So a lot of this goes back to my own advisor back in grad school, who was Robert Sternberg, who had his triarchic theory of everything. And he would always have a creative way, an analytic way, and a practical way. And so what I always try to do in my assignments is to allow students to approach it in either an analytic, compare, contrast way, or a practical way, apply it to your life, or a creative way. And this could be anything from, you know, keeping a diary of colonial life if you're teaching history, designing their own algebraic proof, you know, writing their own haiku. I still remember this back in college. I was taking an English literature course, and one of the 5 potential assignments was to add a page to one of our books. And so one of them was White Noise by Don DeLillo, which probably wouldn't be chosen today. And I added a page to it. And it required content knowledge. I had to demonstrate that I'd read the book, I knew the author's style, I knew the characters. So it's not like, oh, creative, I'm just going to draw a pretty picture. It was demonstrating the content knowledge in a creative way.
That's right. And we've heard a lot as educators about constructivism and so on. I think the best thing I've ever heard about constructivism is actually from somebody who was in the 1800s named Giambattista Vico, who's a philosopher. And basically his argument was, in order to really understand something, you have to make it. If you make something, you understand it, right? And so in order to do something creative, remember, it's not just originality, it has to fit with what you're doing. So adding the page to the book, you're creating something, you have to know the story well enough to where that page actually makes sense that you're at, right? So it's really about inviting students and yourselves just to put a little twist on what they're learning. And by doing that, it actually requires them to deepen their understanding, right? They have to think about it in a deeper way that is surprising maybe to you and others and themselves. And it's just a little adjustment. So that's the whole kind of message that we try to articulate. In my book, Killing Ideas Softly, this is the entire message I try to put.
Literally, it's just slight adjustments written 14,000 times.
Right. You show the page? No, it's not that. But really, it is the idea, I think, when you get a lot of professional development, and I lived through this or suffered through it as a teacher myself, it's try on this new approach. Do this. And then next year, it's like, let's not do that. Let's move to this. Let's try this on, right? And we have all these scattered remnants of these professional development things. All I'm trying to say is do what you're already doing and just make a little twist. And not a twist that we're saying. Make the twist by inviting your students to put the twist. Put your own twist on it. Do what you're already doing, just slightly more creative, slightly better, right? So trust your own practice. Do what you're comfortable with, but put a little twist of uncertainty in there. So what would that look like? It's very simple stuff. This is from an actual second grade lesson where there's a video footage of this. But imagine this. Imagine in second grade math, which is definitely, you're starting to see double column subtraction in second grade, even in first grade, some Common Core stuff, right? So imagine you ask a kid to not only explain the answer, but how they got the answer. So you put this on the board, 26 minus 17. Kid says 9. That meets expectation, right? Sometimes when we're pressed for time, we might be satisfied with that. We move on. That's problematic. I think the Common Core wants us to go deeper, right? And so what if a kid said, I added 3 back to 6 and got 9? By all accounts, that is an unusual response. Now, this is where the little slight adjustment occurs. What if we took 2 or 3 seconds just to say, I don't understand how that fits with that problem. Rather than say, why don't you think about that some more? Can somebody help him out with that? Because we're expecting borrowing to happen here, most of us that have been taught this, right? Here's what an actual second grade student said. And this is real. By the teacher just drawing out, exploring this, here's what the kid said. I have 26 minus 17. I take my 6 and 7 and set them aside for a second. Now I have 20 minus 10, which is 10. I take my 7, subtract it from 10. That gives me 3. I add it back to the 6, and that's 9. Boom. That's mathematically accurate. It's original. It's creative. The most beautiful thing that happened in that moment that kid said that is there was another little voice in the back who got the answer 11, who got it wrong, said out loud publicly, I disagree with myself now. Which is evidence that this kid's mini C idea, rose to little c, actually impacted another child's understanding. That kid, from hearing his friend explain it, now understood how to do that problem and why it was 9 and not 11. And it's just about creating a moment in the classroom for the kids to actually talk about the way they're coming up with things, rather than assume that we think they're wrong because it didn't meet our expectations. Being curious in that moment, just that slight adjustment of saying, okay, tell me how that relates to the problem, and that kid actually produced what I think is a remarkable example of mini C to little c. So that's a slight adjustment. Here's another one. So this is a typical word problem. This is in a third grade classroom from China. That's in our book, Nurturing Creativity in the Classroom. One of our
Wei
authors
Wan Yu. Yeah.
contributed it. So this is the little twist this teacher puts on it. Very simple. Not only solve this problem, but come up with as many different ways to solve the problem as you can. Right? So when you ask the kid, get the answer